Hello. You just heard that I'm a journalist. I'm also a wife and a mother of 5 children. My husband, John, who you heard from earlier, he and I had 2 sets of twins. We had 4 children in less than 3 years. And then 9 years later, we had a little surprise. We named him Ajax. Ajax is sitting right here today. He's 7 now. Now, you've probably heard the word Ajax before. Maybe you've heard it as the name of a cleansing powder. When you give your child the same name as a cleaning product that was introduced around the time your parents were children, yeah, you're kind of asking for a reaction, let me say. So our parents reacted. My mother-in-law, John's mother, she was a very talkative lady, and she just gasped when we said we're naming our son Ajax. She had 5 children herself, and she probably went through many, many cans of Ajax, cleaning up after them, and I'm guessing she didn't really have the most fond associations with the word Ajax. My mother-in-law, Nancy, recently passed away, and she was a real force of nature, but that was the one time I ever saw her speechless. So she was a little alarmed by the choice of name. My father, he can't quite bring himself to say his grandson's name, so he has taken to calling him Mr. Jax, which I'm not sure Ajax likes very much. My own mother's response was, Ajax, all anyone is going to think of when they hear that name is that jingle from the TV commercial. And I just thought, what are you talking about? What jingle? What TV commercial? So, of course, I Googled it. You can search, and you can find these ads from the 50s and 60s on YouTube. Apparently, there were Ajax commercials like a couple of times a day on TV in the 50s and 60s. So my parents and John's parents would have remembered them. If you look for them on YouTube, they are the most ridiculous ads you've ever seen. What happens is there's a man dressed as a white knight on a white horse galloping through the streets of some town, and he's got a long staff with a flag on it. And in one ad, he comes galloping up to this guy who looks like a short order cook. He's wearing a very stained apron. Happens to be standing outside for some unknown reason, and this white knight comes and just sort of goes presto, and his whole apron goes from a giant mess of tomato sauce to sparkling white. And in another one, there's some kids playing on a suburban street, and they're a complete mess. They've been playing in mud, and this white knight comes along and just boom, all of a sudden they're sparkling clean, which makes the kids in this commercial really happy, which I just highly doubt, right? Wouldn't you rather be messy than like sparkling white? And there's a jingle with this ad, and it goes something like this: Ajax, stronger than dirt, which is, pretty hilarious. So my Ajax is much stronger than dirt. But in fact, long before Ajax was the name of foaming cleanser, he was a great hero of the Trojan War and of Homer's The Iliad. And I'm not sure, I know you guys have been reading the Odyssey, I'm not sure if you've read the Iliad, but you may know a little bit about him. Ajax was a towering figure, a very large man. He was full of integrity, loyalty, courage, and he was the strongest of all the Achaean warriors, way stronger than dirt. Let's just put it that way. In one battle, he defeated the Trojan army single-handedly, kept them at bay. He put himself in great danger again to rescue the body of his fallen comrade, Achilles. According to the Ajax product website, by the way, he was, quote, also known for marching into battle with the cleanest uniform on the Adriatic Peninsula. Yeah, do you buy that? Because I'm not buying it. I mean, I'm not a Homer scholar, and maybe I missed that in the Iliad, but I highly doubt that. When the war comes to an end, both Ajax and Odysseus, who we all know very well, they're vying for the great honor of keeping the armor that had belonged to Achilles. This was a great honor at the end of the war. And though Ajax could rightfully claim to have been the greater warrior, the stronger one, the real hero of the war action, he wasn't much of a public speaker. So Odysseus, with his great oratorical skills, he was much more persuasive in making his case that he should keep the armor and get to be the real hero of that war. And in fact, the Greek kings awarded that honor to Odysseus and not Ajax. Now, for Ajax, this was what we call an epic fail. Like an epic fail for an epic poem, right? And of course, that resulted in an epic tragedy. Ajax went mad and he killed himself. Sorry, Ajax. He secured his sword upon the ground, pointed it upward, and threw himself upon it. Now, our theme here today is muthos, the Greek word for public authoritative speaking, which has the power to effect change. So Ajax did not have or experience muthos in that moment. Now, in this poem that is, among many other things, an example and a celebration of humans' great tradition and ability to engage in storytelling, Ajax's powers of communication completely failed him. Now, how many of us have experienced an Ajax moment? Can you raise your hand? Have you ever needed to say something, speak, make your case, and you couldn't? Right, we all have, okay? So you say something you don't mean, your words come out mangled, and you say to yourself, oh, I just want to kill myself, like Ajax did, right? We all have these moments. In the heat of argument, our words tend to fail us. During moments of pressure, as Ajax was undoubtedly feeling, our words often fail us. When we're put on the spot, we're asked a question that we don't expect, we get called on in class or a meeting, when we're not prepared, our words do fail us. Now, a lot of my work is actually in writing and editing the written word. Sometimes I work in print or online, but even in radio and podcasting and television, even though it sounds like they're spoken words, they're actually usually written ahead of time, as my presentation today. In writing, my meaning can usually be really clear as a bell, and probably a lot of you are this way. You take your time. Like me, you may enjoy crafting a lovely sentence, fitting it into a well-argued paragraph that flows into just a whole arc of an essay or an article. Choosing what comes at the beginning and the middle and the end, when to add detail, when to pull back, when to move things along. These are all, to me, just among the great joys of writing. And I'm a writer, but I'm also an editor. And as an editor, my job is to help other people's words on the page come across as elegantly and persuasively as possible. And that's a collaborative process. This is so different from the way we speak spontaneously, right? Our ideas are coming as fast as the words. They're coming at the same time almost. And once the words are spoken, we can't rearrange them or edit them or make a change in the structure of a sentence. So about 2 years ago, I started a new job in a field I was completely new to. So it was still journalism, but I had done television and print, and now I was in podcasting. And I was going to be in a position that I had to invent as I went along. In most other jobs I had had before, I either knew the people I was going to be working with, so they knew what I was good at and what I wasn't. There was a clear hierarchy, so I knew sort of where I fit in the organization. I learned from the people around me, people above me and people below me. And often I was working with people who knew me pretty well. Now in this new job, I had to stake my claim to authority on my own. I had to be persuasive. I had to communicate well. I had to do a couple of things authoritatively that I didn't really have experience doing. And so before I started, I thought really hard about how I wanted to convey a strength of intellect and authority. And we're talking about speaking authoritatively today. What I really wanted to do was find ways to avoid those Ajax moments where the words just don't come out right. So if you're like me and you're not a person who speaks in complete sentences and who never falls back on like and and these little verbal crutches to keep us going, you probably aren't really going to become such a person without a lot of practice. Now there's value in speaking colloquially with ums and likes. It can suggest friendliness and warmth. It can break down barriers between people. It can convey the message that anyone is welcome to chime in. But I knew that I wanted to change some things about the way I communicated to be more authoritative, and I wanted to try and put the same care and thoughtfulness into speaking as I put into writing. what I settled on that I was going to try and no longer equivocate. Now, what I'm talking about is this is something a lot of young people do, and this is something a lot of women tend to do. We'll preface our statement with, you might not agree, but, and then we tell our idea. Or, this is just off the top of my head, but da da da. Or, I'm not really sure this is such a good idea. So I want to talk about some of these things. I think probably a lot of you in this room will do that. Before you actually say the thing that you really, the point you want to get across, you do this equivocation. So let's take this one. You might not agree, but, well, of course the people around you might not agree. Get rid of that. Don't say that. That is the point of conversing. You're sharing ideas that you may or may not agree with. So let's not say that anymore. Another thing that a lot of people say is, well, this is just off the top of my head, but you don't need that either. Most of what we say is off the top of my head. You don't come into a conversation with a written cheat sheet of what you're going to say ahead of time. We are always reacting to something someone else said. And we almost have never had more than a few seconds to process that. So you don't need to say this is just off the top of your head. One of the worst ones is, I'm not sure this is a good idea, but, okay, this undermines the speaker before the idea is even communicated. Of course you don't know it's a good idea. It might be, it might not. Part of what you're going to find out by communicating with others is if it's a good idea. So what I discovered, I worked really hard at this actually. I was very deliberate about trying to get rid of these little, I think of them as throat clearing before the actual thing I want to say. And if you try this, it's actually a little hard to do, and you have to be pretty deliberate about it, and it takes a while. But you will probably find, as I did, that it gives you more confidence, more authority. And that, in turn, makes others feel that you are more authoritative. So try it. Now, once I knew the verbal tics that I wanted to avoid, these little throat clearings, then I felt I needed to summon the courage to believe that I actually had the authority to speak without equivocation. That what I had to say was very valuable and didn't need any of these little disclaimers. So what gives us the authority to speak? Well, they're the basics. We are human. We have brains, we have opinions, we have ideas, and we can vocalize them. But I realized, I thought long and hard about this, and I realized that what gave me the greatest authority to speak, what gives everybody the greatest authority to speak, is our experiences. In particular, it's our experiences listening to other voices. So I'm going to share a couple of examples from my career in journalism that gave me some authority to speak about topics in conversation. So quite a long time ago, this is about 20 years now, before John and I were married, we were colleagues at ABC News, and we did a few stories together. One of them, we went out to the heartland of America to do a story about a rise in teenagers having babies. There was a sudden spike in this, and the trend was generating a lot of news coverage and a lot of hand-wringing in the country. Now, babies born to unwed teen mothers are significantly more likely to be poor, to be behind in school, to get into drugs and crime, to suffer a whole host of disadvantages that will make it harder for them as they get older. And we thought we'd go to a place where the unwed teen birth rate was about the national average. At this time, it was about 1/3 of all babies in this particular, in the country were being born to unwed teen mothers. And we thought, we'll hold the grown-ups' feet to the fire in this town. We'll really demand to know what's going on, what is being done about it, what's behind this trend. We found ourselves in Sioux City, Iowa, and we had set up interviews ahead of time with a wide variety of people in town. The first person we interviewed was a juvenile court judge, a very thoughtful, soft-spoken guy who'd been in his job for about 16 or 17 years, and he was starting to see teenagers in his courtroom who were getting into trouble, and those kids in his courtroom were the children of teenagers he had seen in juvenile court early in his career. And he was noticing something very clear, which is, and this was clear from the statistics, but he saw it in his courtroom, and that was that many troubled teens eventually wind up having their own troubled teens. And he spoke at length about an idea he had to resolve this, and he thought that people should not be able to enter into parenting lightly, and that you should have to get a license, just like you have to get a driver's license. You'd have to take classes, pass a test, and you couldn't have a kid unless you had a license to do so. And It's not very practical, but he was very persuasive. It was a compelling argument, and I think he was genuinely heartbroken to see this next generation of problems. And then we met with a political leader who argued that it was government financial support for poor young parents that was providing an incentive for teenagers to become parents before they were ready to support them. And he too made a very compelling argument. And then we started meeting with the young mothers. These were girls between the ages of 14 and 16, all with newborns or toddlers, not married to the father of the children. They were not the most sophisticated talkers. They knew they were being interviewed for a national television program. They were not well versed in this particular controversy. They didn't understand it was a trend. They weren't even aware of the statistics that were going likely to have the deck stacked against their own children. And John was the interviewer, and when he asked them why they decided to have a baby, not a single one of them had a well-crafted, well-thought-out answer. Every single one of them, though, had something very important and very illuminating to say. They had not had these babies because of the financial incentives, nor had they entered into the decision lightly. We were very surprised that they had made a deliberate decision to have a baby. And here's why. Their own families had been chaotic, torn apart by one or more, usually more, of the following: divorce, substance abuse, violence, parental abandonment. Having a baby for them was their way to create a loving, lasting relationship, something they craved desperately. Now, this surprised me and astonished me and was absolutely not what I was expecting. Not a single one of the adults we had spoken to, the judge, the politicians, some teachers we spoke to, had understood this important point either. They never mentioned it. Now, as I said, these girls were not persuasive speakers. Most of them, in the interviews, we would call them Ajax Moments, what they were having. Really not persuasive. But, they couldn't explain the main crux of this, which is why they were having children so young. So none of them explicitly said they had deliberately had a baby, but we listened to them talk about their backgrounds, their hopes for their children, their desire to be good parents, the chaos in their own families, and we were able to piece things together, to hear their persuasion by listening to them. It turned out that every single one of the girls we interviewed had been the child of teen parents. They were born at a time when there was a lot of pressure to get married, so they had parents who had married young, but then had divorced. They were doing exactly what their parents had done, only a generation later it was okay to not get married. So now there were other dynamics at work, but this was sort of the main point, was that they wanted to have babies. We went back to ABC News and reported on this story, and it was the first time nationally that this issue had been raised, that this made perfect sense to a 15-year-old to have a baby on their own to fill a need. Now talk about persuasive. Now that's not at all to endorse this position. The reality was it was very, very important to the public discussion, and it was also important to understanding this cry for help from some people who were persuasive but not articulate about it. Now, it was very important to me as a journalist and a believer in persuasion that we need to recognize these Ajax moments. I'm going to give you another example. On another story John and I worked on together, we were covering the civil war in Afghanistan a little bit before the radical Taliban took over that country. We spent an hour or two in a children's hospital in the capital of Kabul. And we had been told that the bombing of the neighborhood that the hospital was in usually began in the late afternoon that day. So we were trying to finish up our filming because we did not want to we did not want to experience that violence. We had one more interview, a boy about 12 or 13, maybe 14 years old, and John asked him a few questions about the war, how long it had been going on, if he could remember a time before it. He had lost an arm, and he asked about that, and the boy had very little to say. And as a lot of young people do, he just didn't know quite how to articulate what he was experiencing. At one point, he just kind of shrugged his shoulders and said, I don't know, that's the way it's always been. At that very moment, a missile whistled through the air. It really made a whistling sound, and it landed probably a block from this hospital that we were in, this children's ward full of children. And it was terrifying. It was terrifying for me. Just a loud, piercing whistle, and it sounded as if it were headed straight toward us. And instinctively, I just dove on the floor in complete fear. And this shell landed. And after a moment, I got up, and I was shaking, and all the kids in the ward were laughing. Now, perhaps it seems silly to them that an adult would just dive when a missile was coming. Perhaps it seemed cartoonish the way I dove on the floor. Maybe just this person whose life is so safe and secure diving on the floor when these kids had lived through what they had lived to just was so absurd that they couldn't help laugh. They didn't say much with words, but I will never forget that laughter because it said so much more than they probably could have said with words. It spoke of heartbreak, cruelty, absurdity, violence, and mostly resilience. They could laugh and move on. So I would encourage you all to go out and have experiences that will give you the authority to be persuasive by listening to others, listening to persuasive voices of others, even if they don't sound like the classic mythos. You don't have to travel to far-flung places. You can read. I loved hearing from, I think, Sophia, a previous speaker, who talked about going out to a restaurant and conversing with her grandpa, conversing with somebody whose name is unusual and finding out about that person's background. So go to that restaurant. Try foods that are unfamiliar to you. Travel if you can. Do things that make you feel a little bit uncomfortable and listen to other people. Now, I want to bring this back to Ajax as I wrap it up. Not Ajax, the foaming cleanser, and not Ajax, the Greek warrior, but my Ajax right here. When Ajax was young, he didn't talk much. Most kids start talking around a year old. By the time they're 18 months, they have quite a few words. Ajax just had none. He didn't say much. And the doctors started getting worried. And I wasn't really worried because I could see that he was communicating. He understood everything that was going on. He responded. He had a great look in his eye. And just as we were about to start ordering some tests to see if there was some issue that we needed to address with him, Ajax just opened up his mouth one day and said one complete sentence. And it was astonishing. And all his siblings were around him. We just happened to be here. And this little quiet man who had a prolonged Ajax moment just spoke, and everyone listened. Thank you.